Yo, so what's up? It's your man David Baki here, man. And I'm gonna basically get right into why I think that we're having such a huge issue with current society, right? Trying to make this pretty short. So, a big issue that we have in society today is the fact that we are not being allowed to have debate, right? We are not being allowed to have conversation about opposing ideas, right? And the issue is that we have, let's look at it like this. So if you have inside a dome, right, you have prey and you have predators, right? You have the natural prey and the natural predators that we have in society today, right? So we know that there are stronger animals and there are weaker animals, right? So let's use the lion and tigers and bears and whichever as an example, right? Let's use those as an example, and let's say the weaker animals are whatever, like the gazelle, whatever they typically eat, right? And let's say above those we have an overseer who is controlling all of it, right? Overseeing all of that, right? Obviously, right? But what we have is that this overseer, what he is basically doing is he has enacted a law that disallows the natural predators to eat or consume the prey, right? So what we have is the disallowance of the natural order to happen, which would facilitate the balance of this little dome ecosystem, right? So what happens is that we have these natural prey, right? They're going to do what? They're going to multiply, and they're going to just, multiply until what? Until they don't, till they feel like it, till they're feeling, right? So what this probably will result in is now we have this dome overrun by these typical natural prey, because the prey that I know typically, when they mate, they happen to have a lot of babies, right? Like a rabbit, they multiply, boom, 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 right? So what we have is the proliferation of these natural prey, right? So let's say the prey start to live in a way where they'll do things that they typically wouldn't do, right? So they might, go into a face of a lion, right? I'll just keep it with the lion, right? They might go into the face of a lion, right? And they might play with the lion. They might toy with the lion. They might mock the lion, right? And the lion, we've already said that the lion can't do anything, right? So the lion has to sit here and really knowing that he would, he would maul these prey. He would get them out of his face. He can't do anything about it, right? So let's say we have 20 rabbits, right? And it's not even the same ecosystem, I know, but we have 20 rabbits or gazelles or whatever, whatever you like, right? And they are antagonizing a group of lions, right? And they're just playing with them. They're eating their food. They're eating their grass, right? They're eating whatever, because if the lions can't eat meat, they have to eat grass, right? So let's say they're just toying with them. They're peeing on them. They're, drinking their water that they're about to drink. They're taking their food. They're having fun. They're, you know, hitting them. They're, I don't know, nudging them, doing, they're in their face. They're all up in their bed. They're taking their spots, that they were going to sleep at, whatever, right? And they're doing it because they're having fun with it. They're doing it and they're enjoying doing it because there's no risk to doing it, right? There's nothing they know that nothing is going to happen to them when they're doing these things, right? So what that means is that they're they're free to do so, right? And it just happens and the lions just have to deal with it, right? So let's say the lion, this continues on and the lion is eating this grass, eating plants, vegetation, whatever, and the lion is continuously getting weaker and weaker. Why? Because the caloric intake that they normally have to kind of build and feed this mass isn't being allowed, right? So they get smaller, they get weaker, right? And let's say on top of that, we still have the happening where we have these prey animals that are just antagonizing them every day, right? And they're making the lion's life miserable, but the prey's life is having they're having a great time because they have no restrictions, right? They don't have any restrictions, right? There weren't any restrictions posed upon them. The only restriction we said was that the natural predators can't eat the prey, right? So, and so what this results is that, let's say these lions have to deal with this BS every day. Now, what's going to probably happen? What's going to happen is that these lions are going to lose the will. They're going to already be weak from what they're being reduced to eating, right? But they're going to lose the will to really just enjoy themselves at all. They're going to lose the will to live or to try to flourish themselves because they already are weak. They can't hunt, right? Which I'm sure lions love to hunt, right? And also they have these little weakling animals in their faces every day, which they could just bat all, they could bat away like a whole slew of them, but they're being disallowed to do so, right? So what happens is this animal literally doesn't even, maybe he doesn't even, or she doesn't even rather, they don't feel like even doing much of anything, right? Because their life has become miserable. It's been made miserable, right? And also, beside of that, we have the overrunness of these unchecked, weaker animals, of these unchecked multiplying animals that are constantly multiplying. They're multiplying like they have nothing else better to do, right? So what we have, we end up in this dome, right? Where they have it was a certain infrastructure that was built to support a certain amount, right? But because we have basically these animals that are now overrunning the entire system of the ecosystem, right? What happens now is that because they are overrunning and they are now playfully just being, the most they're being the most mischievous they can be because they have no restrictions, right? So what happens is that or now what they're doing is they have no respect. They have no respect for the lion. They have no respect for anything. They'll eat, they'll play with things, they'll waste things, right? So what happens is the fabric of this infrastructure that they had, that they were given, is now being overrun by things that are completely misusing it, and they have no respect for the infrastructure, which basically means that they're just making a mess of everything, right? So what's eventually going to happen? What eventually is going to happen is that this infrastructure is eventually going to corrode and be destroyed so much that it's going to collapse, right? Because it's going to be overrun by the weaker animals, right? And the prey that could do something are being limited to doing nothing, right? So they're off in their little corner, right? They live and they go off and they go hide somewhere because literally they're just trying to find some peace because the society or the ecosystem that they live in is just a mess. And anytime they would like to go, they're just being toyed with and being made miserable. And they've had their power stripped from them completely to even defend themselves, right? So they're basically a joke, right? Let's say even if they bat at, the prey, the prey knows they can't do anything, right? So they just keep, it just causes them to play with them more, right? So the only option for this line, the prey or the prey animals, all of them, is to go and try to just get some peace in a little nook, right? Because there's literally not much space otherwise, because we have these weaker animals that are unchecked now overrunning the society, which basically is destroying the society, which means that the society is due to collapse, and the society eventually does collapse, right? So it's a mess, and it eventually ends up in the destruction of this entire ecosystem, and everything collapses, right? Now, much like this, in this example, this same type of thing is happening, or is being allowed to happen in our society today, right? Because of the lack of debate, right? And we don't realize how powerful and how necessary the conversation, the logos, the speaking about ideas actually is, right? We don't realize now, because especially with back in the 2020, right, where we had one idea which was allowed to be the idea, right? And we all know what happened when at the height of that time, when anybody had anything to say which was contrary to that idea. Well, what happened? It was destroyed. It was not allowed. It was simply not allowed to be by the mainstream media, by your friends, your family, whoever, right? Why? Because we were in a state of fear, right? And because we were in a state of fear, we were trying to hold on to anything that was going to save us, right? And as citizens, we somehow thought that because we pay the tax dollars to the people who are supposed to be, or the entities that are supposed to be governing this society, we thought that they were going to be the ones to save us. So, which caused us to ultimately just believe whatever they said and allow them to lead us, right? Which showed us and exposed to us the real issues with that in general, but also the fear of what can result from that, right? Just, and even in just self-reflection, right? Us just thinking about, how could I become this? How could I allow this to happen? How could I squash my better thought, right? How did I allow myself, this to happen? But it happened because there was only one idea that was being allowed at the time. And that one idea was the only accepted idea, right? Which means what? There was no debate allowed. There was no conversation allowed. And one of the major things that debate is useful for is combating two strong, or two, not even strong, but two ideas together, right? Much like the survival of the fittest I guess my illustration of the ecosystem inside the dome, right? When you have the prey against the predator, who's going to win? Whoever's the strongest at that particular time, right? That's going to be the victor, right? So debate is just that. It is taking two ideas and seeing which one is the stronger idea, which basically means that it is more in line, it's more in tune with some type of truth about reality, which means that it is a lot more productive to maintain that idea as opposed to the other idea, which might have just been shown or exposed as nonsense, right? And one of the major things that is happening right now, especially with all of the entities that are having their way with the mainstream platforms that we all use to talk on, is that we are being disallowed debate. And that disallowance of debate is having major consequences and will have much more major consequences with our society. And I think I'm gonna end this one right here. And in part two, I'll explain really what the problem of that is and why that is one of the main dangers that we actually need to think about as people, as individuals in society. It is imperative that we take note of this if we don't take note of anything else. This lack of ability to have conversation, have debate, lack of ability to have an idea presented to you and not be able to have a conversation about that idea to see whether or not it even holds water or not. And why or how that might not seem that important, but really how that is majorly important in everything in society.